Hi again, it's Greg with A&A Masonry. We're bringing you to a job site that is very common of a call that we get, which is from a condo association, multi-unit complex, where they have boards and budgets for repair and replacement and fixes on the property. And this particular job, they have dealt with these type of masonry errors and corrections that are required. They've dealt with them before and always have gotten disappointed with the quality of work, the length that work will last, and having to repeat it. Again, it is very expensive. And as you know, A&A Masonry is all about doing the right job, doing it once, and then moving on to doing something else. And doing that, you have to always consider how water is moving around the materials on the exterior, especially in our climate when it's freezing and thawing. This particular complex, after really getting to know the leaders of the board and the residents themselves, and explaining the differences. And I'm going to show you very quickly some of the repairs you can see that were done in the past that are really just a waste of money, waste of time, and really aren't going to last. And it's not going to respect the value of these properties and the aesthetic look of these homeowners that is required when you're doing proper masonry. So come on, I'm going to show you some of the things that we're going to do. This is very typical. It's called tuckpointing, which is where the mortar is eroded between the brickwork. There's usually an origination point where it erodes and attacks the mortar on a brick and mortar wall. That is the weaker of the two. And you can see it, it's what we call a step crack. It'll follow that. And a lot of times we are faced with people that have just filled the cracks, kind of covered it up. There's no strength in it. It looks fine for a couple of months, but as soon as it gets wet and it freezes, at some point it just cracks and falls off again. Again, it's a waste of money. Here's why when we sit down and we really, for lack of a better phrase, educate and show the board the differences between what is tuck pointing and what is just covering a step crack, what is parging and just kind of slapping something over a foundation and doing it in a way that'll last. It was very easy once they understood that to give us the budget that we needed to do something like this, because again, they appreciate the fact that if it's not done correctly, it's just going to depreciate the value of the property. It's going to be a constant repetitive repair, and that's something that you can avoid with concrete, with masonry, with landscaping, hard landscaping, if it's done correctly and you manage the water.
A&A Masonry, an award-winning company servicing the Greater Toronto Area and the Golden Horseshoe.
Now here we're in the phase of what we call a very staple type of job, of course, is tuck pointing, where the mortar is eroded from water, or what we call a step crack. Usually originates around a doorway at the base of the home where it meets the ground or sits on top of the foundation around a doorway. And also the parging the foundation, typically between a garage door opening, is where you'll find most erosion of water. As we mentioned, in this complex, it's just inundated with that kind of work. Some of it is when it was built, the techniques they use, some of it is the design, the archway, the vertical joints that are longer, those causes the step cracks and the eroded mortar. As I mentioned, you can see the window sills, those brick window sills. Today, if this project and complex was built, it would be done with concrete or limestone sills, not brick sills. But those erosion of mortar joints is what originates the water to cause destruction and cracks that work its way down, in this case down to the arch area. And you can see right now Eduardo is doing typical tuck pointing. And we can see, as I mentioned before, where sometimes they just fill the crack and walk away from it. That won't hold, it's not strong. You need to actually grind it out. He's ground it out, you can see, kind of like in a grid fashion, to get rid of all the deteriorating, the weakened, the compromised mortar. He's mixed a nice batch here, somewhat stronger, and able to get into the joints at least an inch deep, cleans it out. And we also take the time to slightly match the mortar. In this case, it's not just a typical gray, it's going to stand out. We don't want to see this repair be apparent and stand out like you see in so many other typical masonry repairs. It defaces the aesthetic look, and that's important to us. So we've mixed a little bit of federal white masonry along with the typical type N. So when it dries, it's going to be blended in. So when you see this, when it's all done, it's going to, aesthetically, it's going to look like it was never a problem before. Also, we're right in the middle stages of the parging, and you can see they put a nice layer on top. Again, it's a slightly different mix. We don't just randomly just throw the same type of material as we do on the bricks, as we do on the foundation. Everything is treated with the consideration as to what is going to work best and last the longest. And parging is, again, one of those things where you can do it very quickly. It'll fall off. You have to repeat it. That's one of the reasons why we have that SureGuard application to avoid that. But in this particular case, this job calls for the specific resurfacing with parging. We can take our time. We can do it properly. And time means that you have to let it sit so it dries consistently. And it also has to be slowed down when it's drying so it really bonds and builds strength. And then we can texturize it just as it's coming to firmness and give it a nice finish. So again, aesthetically, but more importantly, it's going to move the water off the face of this building. So we can stand back, just watch Eduardo finish his work. And again, you can see it's the time that it takes to do it right so that this complex does not have to deal with these things again in the near future. And we're doing it with the consideration of making the water avoid having the ability to attack this type of structure again in these vulnerable spots. And we're doing that again with the knowledge of how to manage water. So I want to bring you in on a close-up. So initially when I walk through these properties with the manager or the board itself, we kind of look at a reoccurring theme. And again, as I mentioned, the step crack, the parging around the foundation, very typical, almost every house in our area where there's winter weather, you're going to see the foundation that takes a super hit of salt water, ice, and freezing and thawing on the door openings, the columns between the door openings of the garage. So this foundation, and you can see in the past, as I mentioned earlier, some of the repairs where they just kind of put some styrofoam in there and they're trying to plug the hole, prevent rodents from getting in there, further decay. But it needs proper masonry to kind of maintain the integrity structure of the exterior masonry work for this building. The other thing is that it comes with an arch design, and a typical with arches that are certainly not necessarily structural like in a double masonry. It's just the veneer on a wood frame. The vertical joints from above will get they start to crack, and then you can see in the arches, it's very typical. We can go along all these different units and see that this is a very typical. Some are worse, some are better. And it always originates from something. Again, it's always investigating the water. We look at the window sills. We can see that they're brick window sills. And the mortar joints between the brick window sills on the horizontal level sits the water, the snow, the freezing, the thawing. It breaks the mortar, it cracks the mortar, and then it gets into the brickwork. And you can see this is a typical step crack. And it gets a little bit more aggressive because it actually breaks the brick and goes more straight line down to the archway. And that's just water expanding. Cracks, more water gets in, and that cycle is what causes further erosion. So you have to deal with it at some point. We can see here also that they've covered it up where you can see discoloration, but they just followed the crack, and it's very superficial. It's very fine. It's brittle. It's like a wafer thin cracker that's just, as soon as it gets wet, it's going to crack again. We have to go in, and I'm going to show you the technique shortly, but you're going to have to go in and you have to grind it in somewhat of a grid fashion, but you have to get into about an inch so that there's some strength and integrity into the mortar that reconnects with the brick, and then it becomes uniform as one. The other thing with the parging is if this had SureGuarded on originally, it would have prevented any of this from happening. But because it's in such disarray and eroded to a point, the board wanted it to be brought up and reparge. We have to take our time because in variations of thickness of the parge, like on this corner here, which would be to your right, it's maybe 2 inches of mortar that has to be built up, that has to have some strength, otherwise it's going to want to delaminate and separate again. Where here, we're just basically filling in the surface. We want it to dry in a consistent fashion, so it's going to be the same color and so forth. So it's very, very technical, but when it's done properly, it'll last. And again, I mentioned SureGuard. That is why we're going, because these type of procedures, these type of jobs, the cost for labor is expensive if it's done correctly over time and you want it to last, and SureGuard really makes that happen. But again, in this case, we're going to do a proper parge. With A&A Masonry, we give a lifetime service agreement with this type of work. So we're going to do it in a fashion that it is going to last, regardless of whether it's SureGuarded or not in this case, because we can spend the time with it. So let's go over and take a look. I think Eduardo is working right now doing some tuck pointing, and he's in the middle phase of a parging. And then I'll show you how it looks when we're done, and we're just waiting for it to dry.
And here Greg is pointing out the condition of the foundation in between the garages. As you can see, there have been various attempts at fixing the foundation that have failed. These have left the foundation surface in a serious risk of potential structural problems if not dealt with. You can see the before and after the work was done once the crew built the foundation surface back up and finished it with a nice parge. You can also see the step cracks leading from the window sills down to the arch, where, as Greg explained, had been filled in by wafer-thin mortar that just re-cracked again after a short period of the freeze-thaw cycle. And here you can see the crew after the grinding process was done filling in the bricks with the mortar blend that Greg previously explained. After mortar is placed in the joints during tuck pointing, the process of finishing and shaping the mortar joints is called pointing or repointing. Pointing or repointing prevents water from entering the brick or stone walls, which can cause damage and structural issues. It also enhances the appearance of the walls. The crew address all the areas of step cracks as well as any needed brick replacement on all units. This also includes the foundation parging between garages in most of the units as well for a job well done.
Okay, I'm going to show you some finished work, and in this particular unit I wanted to bring you over here. In this complex I think there's 75, 78 units, each in varying different degrees of required masonry work. So when we look at this, we just kind of see how our crew will move through this complex and taking consideration all the elements, and again moving through it and getting it complete. That's how we kind of come up with a budget, and also understanding what are the requirements, what is required from our perspective, what fits into the budget with these type of associations and so forth, and then just doing the right job. In this particular case, this unit here, and you'll see in the before pictures, this brick wall, as it's going here against the foundation itself, the wood frame actually starts here. This is the concrete foundation, and the brick, you can see it's just one course or one wall of brick that's attached to the foundation. When this complex was built, they did not use what we call wall ties, and they're basically anchor points that sit on top of the bricks as you're laying the bricks, and then it's attached, it's a metal plate, it's attached to the wall itself, and it prevents the wall from laterally moving back and forth. So when water gets in, as you've seen in these videos here that we're showing you of these units in varying degrees of water damage, in this case it was getting between this brick wall and the concrete foundation wall and was separating, so the weight was kind of bowing outwards, and any kind of impact to the slightest degree would have caused the wall to fall forward and maybe everything else to come on top of it. So it's a serious detail and issue if it's not dealt with correctly. So what we did is we supported, and we actually had to support the archway and carry the weight of the brick wall above, and we took all these bricks down, cleaned them up. It's what we call reclaiming them. Because some of them were beyond reusability and reclaiming, we opted for a concrete brick, which is the same makeup of this, but we're not going to find this type of brick in the marketplace. So we kind of blended in, and you can see Eduardo has done a very nice job in doing that. But we've also taken the anchors, and this is what I'm talking about. It's just a piece of metal, and you bend it and you lay it on top of the brick. When you're laying it, the mortar goes on top, but you actually nail, or in this case, because it's concrete, we have to use a Tapcon screw and screw it in, and that will, with the mortar, will lock the wall in place. So if a car was to hit it, it'll just impact the bricks, but the wall won't come down. In a double masonry, the bricks themselves act as that locking, or those ties as we call it. They're used with bricks to tie the two walls together. You can also see the step cracks are carrying up in this case, because this is one of the buildings or units that has more water damage than, say, others in this complex. We're going through and we're taking care of all source points of water, and you can see that once the mortar is beginning to dry, this is still wet and will take several days before it really dries up true and matches very close to the original mortar, because we mixed it again with a little bit of Federal White and Type N masonry. But you can see where it's drying here, it's almost, I really can't even tell the difference other than the fact that I can see that there's been work here that's been done. So we'll show you the front, and then also I want to show you some of the finished parging. When Eduardo's done, it looks great. Now this is the front view of the wall which was bowing out, and again, like I said, from a front view, again, we have to support this arch and the weight of the brick above it. We temporarily do that with shoring, and then we can take all this brickwork out, and you can see where we had to replace some water damaged bricks. We couldn't, again, find the perfect match, but the best available match. But look at the mortar work, and you can see where it's starting to dry. This was done, I think, a day ago. But you can see right here, it's really blending in, and it's going to match almost perfectly. Again, to the top, you can see all the step cracks and so forth that we're taking care of. Those are the origination points. The other thing that this complex is required, or I think needs, definitely needs, is caulking around all the contact points from one material to the next. When you get wood, metal, glass, steel, stucco to masonry, the expansion contractions are different when it's freezing and thawing, so that gap needs to be covered with a caulking. This has not been recaulked since probably the original caulking when it was built, and what happens is water manages its way to get in there around the window. It can cause mold. We always recommend caulking. It's a wonderful solution. It's very inexpensive. It's great for home maintenance. It's the same thing like doing new eaves troughs and roof water management to keep all the water damage away. But now that we're done this unit looks absolutely beautiful, and we know it's safe. So if somebody was to accidentally back their car and hit this wall, we don't have 30, 40, 50, 100 bricks falling onto the car. It'll just impact the bricks, and it can be replaced, and everybody is safe. Okay, this is the same complex. There's about 11 different separate complexes. We're starting on this one here, and I've showed you variations of beginnings, what we saw when we initially walked around, Eduardo working, Eduardo finishing a very destroyed and a water-damaged garage wall that it was separating from the house itself. But this is so typical, I think, in any house. You could walk around the front on the garage. Again, in our climate, the water splashes, it hits, snow builds up there. This is the foundation, which the brick is built on top of, and this part always takes a hit. Usually in the decades of 80s, early 90s, 80s, or before, bricks would just come down to here, and unless they're concrete, they really take a hit. The mortar joints, you can see, they get eroded above it. But Eduardo's finished a nice parging job. You can see from the original one that I showed you where there was styrofoam and there was gaps and things like that. The difference between parging from somebody who really has the skills, such as Eduardo, as opposed to somebody who's just applying the mortar, is in the consistency, the way it dries. It's going to be nice and hard all the way through. It's not going to want to crack, which will originate water again and then fail in a couple of years, 4 or 5 years. And it's also about us. It's always, if it's done well, the aesthetics look great too. You can see it looks like it's poured concrete. It's one pour, it's drying the same. But this is a nice layer of parging. And the purpose of this is to protect the erosion like you saw in the original one, where there's essentially the water is just eating away the foundation. The bricks are going to want to start to fall with gravity. And if there's no wall ties, it just becomes a much more expensive job. So like I say, whether you're a residential homeowner or you're a condo association or a multiplex board and you're looking for repairs that are cost beneficial for the long term, these are the type of fixes that you need to do. And you need to do it with a professional, high-skilled masonry crew that knows how to deliver this stuff so that it's consistent and it will last. Now here we are. The project is all done. Everybody in this complex has been very happy and cooperative, and the job came out beautifully. You can see originally where we had this wall here, where we had to actually take down the bricks on the left side of the garage because it was bowing out. We tied it back into the wall using those metal brackets. Eduardo and his crew took their time. They repointed step cracks on the side of the wall. It's drying very nicely. And actually, the front, you can't even tell the difference from one mortar to the next. We matched it almost perfectly. The other units where there were step cracks over the arches, you're going to see right now, can't even tell that work was done. That's the key to good tuck pointing, is to grind it out deep enough, clean it out, actually add some water sometimes to give it some moisture so it doesn't dry too quickly. Match that mortar and anticipate how it's going to dry so it looks beautiful and it never looks like it's been done before and it had to be repaired. And that's the whole key to doing restoration work done right. Eduardo also took some time after looking at these units over and over again, going through one by one. He did a lot of parging on the columns that are between the two garage door openings. It's a common factor where you get a lot of erosion and spalling of the concrete or the masonry work there because of the salt and snow that builds up in the wintertime. The cars going through back and out of the the garage itself. So we want to address those. So everybody's really happy here. We're really happy with this project. And again, if you've got these multi-unit complexes, it's important that if you're going to do this type of work, you want to do it in a way that it's going to last for decades and decades. And masonry done right, regardless of the elements of the weather, as long as we can manage the water, which we've done in this case, this example here, tying that brick wall back into the concrete surface so that if water does or get behind it, it cannot separate that brick wall. And also the tuck pointing, again, is on the step cracks below the window sills and the garage door openings on almost all of these units has been done. It looks great. Take a look. We're on to our next job. Now in these units, again, this is a common theme, as I mentioned. You can see the step cracks that were originally there are now gone. It originates from the window sills. Those are brick headers, as we call them. The half a brick basically put up against the window. It's an inferior sill because there's a lot of mortar joints. It'll receive water, it'll crack, and that'll begin the step crack. And then again, an arch is sometimes inferior in this case because it's not double masonry. It's not strong enough, so you'll get these hairline cracks. Water went around, took care of them. Again, the aesthetic look is what we're looking for and trying to achieve. In this case, I think Eduardo really hit it out of the park. Can't even tell where the work's done. But if you look at the before and after pictures, you clearly see. And again, this is restoration work done beautifully. Thanks to Eduardo, we've got happy customers, and they will definitely use this again. And also the project managers and maintenance companies will seek us out to do all of their masonry work.
To schedule your next project, contact A&A Masonry today.